Hey everybody, thanks for joining us on the Unified Podcast. Again, today we are here at Potter's House Church with Pastor Wayne Campbell. And man, thank you so much for jumping into the conversation.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, it's great. I gotta say right off the top, man, I love you. There's every time I see what your church is doing around town and whatever, I just feel like this kindred spirit for the way that things are walked out.
Yeah.
Not that there's, right and wrong ways, more or less what God's called us to.
Yeah.
But man,
for sure.
we're so excited to see when your sandwich boards are going up, that you got your camps running and all that. And we were just discussing how summer's shaping up to be full and exciting.
Yeah, and it's so good when we get to be out at community events together, and it's like, hey, we're just trying to engage the community and
when I can borrow your
people.
stuff and run those events.
Absolutely. If we're not using it, so yeah.
Yeah, you guys were great. We our first November here, so we were here probably about 6-7 months. We were doing an info night and realized that the place that we were renting had no chairs, or they had 4 chairs.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I called you up. I'm like, dude, I need a hand. You guys were right there, like, take anything you need. So thanks for that. It was a great night. And again,
our chairs they were really fancy chairs. So.
They were better than what were there for sure.
They're sittable. So,
But yeah, and again, that's just a huge kudos to, I think, what the Lord's doing and how He's using you guys in that. But again, what we've seen with so many ministers in the area. And you may have noticed by his accent, you're not from around here, are you?
Not from around here. Before we get to that, though, just on what you were just saying, brings to mind kind of the full circle, because when we first got here, which we'll get to that story in a minute, but one of the other churches in town that really helped us out was Lakeview Heights and Linden, and so we were kind of in the place where you guys are, where we had rented space for Sunday morning, but outside of that, it's like, hey, whose house are we going to, kind of thing, right? Totally. And so several times for like special events, they were like, yeah, just come use our building. Like, we're not using it. You guys need it, use it. And so that kind of like camaraderie was kind of what we were welcomed into when we first got here. And so we definitely want to continue that trend with others that as they come in and they're starting good kingdom work here. And so yeah. But all right, so you were wanting to go somewhere else now.
But yeah, you're just how you got here. This is probably a town you never heard of.
I'd never heard of it. Nope. So originally, I'm from the South in the States. Grew up in Mississippi. Lived in Ohio for a little bit, and then went to school for university in Tennessee. And then after university, I went to a church in Alabama where I was a youth pastor for 8 years. And then I was a campus pastor, where we started a satellite campus of the church in the next town over, kind of thing. And I did that for 2 years. So for most people around here, when I say those states, they're kind of like, where is that? So so you got Florida and you got Texas. Most people know those two, go between them, and that's where I'm from. And so yeah, from down in the South, always thought I would, since I was called to ministry, I thought I would be in the States for sure. The furthest I thought I would go from there would maybe like somewhere along the Northeast or something like that, in that area. But yeah, I had a roommate in university who was from Cochrane, right outside of Calgary. And so he, after university, came back to Cochrane. This was in Tennessee, and pretty much since then has been trying to get me to come to Canada. And I'd always tell him, no, I don't want to go there. It's cold up there. But we got to the point where I was kind of praying through, and I knew the Lord was leading me towards being like a senior pastor kind of role, because I was associate pastor at the church where I was, and I knew that was where God was leading me, but I didn't know kind of when and where. And so just talking to an old friend, catching up with a buddy from university days, and it's like, hey, this is kind of what God's doing in my life and where He's leading me. And he's like, there's a church here in Calgary that's looking for a pastor, and I really think you should look into it. His comment was, they have a building. That's a big deal here. Which now I realize that is a big deal here. Yeah. Coming from the South, not as big a deal because there's church buildings literally everywhere. Anyway, so I kind of blew him off, and I was like, whatever, it's cold up there. I don't want to go up there, which Calgary is cold. Why would anybody want to live there?
Kelowna's cold. I moved 3 hours. I thought I was going to die, so I can't imagine the
going even further,
that you
right?
had to do.
So, but I did do what you do when you're trying to sense the Holy Spirit's call. I Googled it. And so I Googled this church, and a website popped up, and it was churches in Canada looking for pastors, and it only had 2 churches listed on it. One was that church, and the other was this Potter's House Community Church in West Kelowna. And I'm like, where in the world is that? So I was like, what does it hurt? I'll send my resume to both of them. And so I did. And I don't think I ever heard from that church in Calgary, but the group that was looking for a pastor here at Potter's House they got with me right away. We started to get to know each other. So once again, I'm like, okay, well, how do I find out about this place? And so I went on Google to Street View, and I literally drove around West Kelowna on my computer, and I was like, man, this looks like a pretty cool place. Like,
as long as Street View's done during the summer.
Right.
Yeah.
It was all summer Street View for sure. So, which I actually like the winter. I don't mind it. So, but anyway, and so we got to talking with the search committee that was looking for somebody, and getting to know them, and just hearing their heart and their passion for their church and for their community, and got to know that the church had really kind of hit some rough times. It started back in 2000, got going really well as a church plant, as far as for like our tribe of churches or whatever. It was even put out there as like the success story of church planting. And so it was very successful, and then hit some rough waters, and things got a little dicey, and by the time they started talking to me and I was kind of coming into the picture, there were like 12 people that were left, holding on to this thing, trying to keep it going, and kind of what they were holding on to was just the fact that they said, hey, God's not done here yet. God's not done here yet. God has something in store for us. He has a future for us. And so I'm getting to know these people and talk to them. I just love their hearts. I love where they're coming from. I just love their just authenticity that they had about and still have about their faith and who they are. And so I was praying through, and I was like, okay, God, is this where you're leading me to go take on something like this, or what? And we kind of got to the point in the conversation where the next step was for us to come up here and get to know them in person, that kind of thing. And that happened about the time when my wife Brittany was told by her doctor that with her first pregnancy that she needed to go on bed rest. And so I was like, hey, can't really take off to another country right now. Wife expecting our first just went on bed rest, and they're like, okay, well, we understand. And so once our son was born, and he was 2 months old, I got back with them and said, hey, like we probably can make a trip now if you guys are still interested. And kind of thinking like, if the 12 of you are still actually hanging in there, like, and they said, yeah, we want you to come. And so we did. So here I have my wife with our firstborn, which at the time we lived about 10 minutes from her parents' house. And we get on an airplane to go check out a church on the other side of the continent. And so we came up here, and she kind of was, my wife's incredible. Like she loves the Lord and just has an incredible relationship with him and walks with him daily, and she's just incredible. But, she kind of came with this kind of mindset of, okay, my husband says we need to go check this out, but I'm still trying to figure out being a new mom, and having mom next door is pretty nice. And so we come up, and that's kind of where she is. Well, we get off the plane, and they meet us. We go out to eat with some of them. We go back to a hotel, and then the next day we do a little bit of stuff. And about halfway through that day, I looked at her, and I was like, you feel like you're home, don't you? And she said, yep. She said, I don't want to leave. And I was like, well, I'm not leaving you in another country because we have return tickets. So she was ready just to stay at that point.
Yeah.
I wasn't so sure yet. I was still wrestling through like, hey, I'm a dad. Now I'm got a family to look after, provider, that kind of thing, all that going on in my mind. And I'm like, there are 12 people left in this small group in another country. I'd already been told at that point that if I did come to do this, that the visa that Canada would let me come into the country on would specify that I could only work at the church. So I couldn't
bivocational.
Can't do anything like that, right? None of the bivocational, co-vocational, whatever language you want to use now for it, those options were kind of out for me. So I'm like, how in the world could this even work? And that kind of thing. And so, and also when I came up, I was really praying through, I was like, God, are you sending me up there just to tell these people to quit? Do they just need somebody to come in and say, hey, you've had a good run, but it's time to stop, move on, join another church, do something else, just quit. But when I got here, and I just really, the passage that kept coming to mind was the passage in Acts where Paul is in an area and things are getting kind of frustrating. Things aren't going really well. And he's thinking about leaving, moving on. And then the Spirit tells him, the Spirit says, no, I'm not done here yet. I have many more in this town that belong to me, that are mine. And you're supposed to stay here. And so that was the passage that kept coming to mind over and over again when I was here for the first time. Just the fact that in West Kelowna, in the Okanagan, God has many more who are his, who just haven't heard yet, that they need to come to him. They need to be shown the way to faith. And they need to grow in discipleship. And so I was like, okay, I hear what you're saying, God. You're not telling me to tell them to shut the thing down, right? And so then we were left with how could we make it work or not work? Is God really telling me to be the one to come and do this? Like I said, my biggest personal holdout was still just this aspect of being a father now, brand new newborn.
Life has completely shifted.
Yeah, and I was at a very established church, and as far as job security or whatever, there's no concerns whatsoever. As far as a human perspective of paying the bills and that kind of thing, I couldn't really have a better setup than what I had there. And then looking at God calling us to something totally out there different. And so when I got back, so I'm wrestling through, and the next weekend, the church there had a men's retreat that I went on. And the very first night, the pastor's passage for the night was where Jesus says that if you love your son, daughter, husband, wife, mother, father more than me, then you're unworthy to be my disciple. And I was like, okay, I get it. You're saying that's not an excuse, that I can't use my family as a reason to not do what you're calling me to do. And so I said, okay, well, if the church votes that they do want me to come, then we'll try to figure out how to make it work. Well, they did. Actually, a unanimous vote. So for churches, that's a big deal to have a unanimous vote, even if it's just 12 people.
Totally. Wherever two are, they can be divided.
For sure.
I don't know if that's in the Bible somewhere.
Yeah. So they wanted me to come. So then we had to figure out how to make it work. And so we went through the mission agency that actually helped start the church in the first place, and went through their whole assessment process for being approved as church planters. Basically, they treated it as hey, you're going in as a church planter, and you've got a core group of 12 to start with. And I'm like, okay, sure, we can say it that way. Which now
replant.
Yeah, now the language even in that group has really moved further into the whole replant language, and the new. That's the new language for kind of what we're doing, where you come into an established church and kind of help it breathe some new life there. And so we went through that. Then we raised support to be able to come and do what we're doing. And then we moved up here. That was 3.5 years ago that we moved up here, and have been at it since. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that identifying your calling is so key.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, it's one of those, if you understand that God's asking you to do something, you know, there's that tenacity, hopefully, that comes with it when you see that you're inheriting a church of 12 people, you know, and then you're like, that doesn't make sense. And, you know, I think it's a matter of, you know, especially for leadership to understand that, you know, the plan doesn't need to make sense, and it's not our plan.
Right.
It's more of a walk of obedience. So I just want to encourage you. Hold on to those things. I remember hearing from a guy speaking. It was just a thing I was watching, and he was wrestling through this, like, why does that calling process have to be so difficult? And, you know, it was kind of brought up to him through some friends, where it's like, because when it goes rough, that's the one thing you're holding on to is God said, you know. So
absolutely. Yeah. And there's nothing rougher, in my opinion, than church planting or replanting or whatever you want to call it. Because you do have those times where you're just like, what is going on? And like, why am I even doing this anymore? And that kind of thing. And a lot of that's the enemy coming at you, wanting to distract and take away from what God wants to do. But yeah, one of the biggest things you have to hold on to in that is just that assurance that you have that, hey, God called me to this. He made it so clear that this is what I'm supposed to be doing and where I'm supposed to be. And so
yeah, and I even think for the church as a whole, I mean, it's one thing to hear pastors and you know, board members, elders, whatever, talking about having that calling, but essentially that's for every person. And it's what is God asking of me in life, in this season, and then holding on to that as you walk out, because I think what He's calling us to, and we can see it, you know, in a fairly plain read of Scripture, is He calls us to some pretty crazy stuff. Yeah. And then when we look at that more personally, it's always going to be stretching. So yeah, I think that's, you know, the more we can trickle that down into our people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So like, to fast forward a chunk, you know, so that's kind of how you arrived here, left family. I mean, that's especially with a young child and support physically.
I think my in-laws' comment was, yeah, we can really see why God's calling you guys to this, but can you leave the grandson here? Like,
exactly. So. Yeah, that was, I think, the worst thing that kind of came to mind conversation-wise, setting out, was having to say, essentially, not in these words, because you would never spin it this way, hi, we're taking the grandkids away from you. Like, that's never going to go over well. But yeah, I mean, so 3.5 years later, you're here. And, you know, I'd just like to talk for a couple of minutes just about, you know, what's next. Obviously, we talked, you got your summer camps and you're heading into that, but where do you feel the Lord's leading you guys as a church, you know?
Yeah, so to answer that, I would say part of the answer to that goes back to what we did from when we first got here. So when we first got here, a lot of what I was trying to do was like hearing from our people that were left about, hey, what drew you to this church in the first place? Like, why did you come to Potter's House in the first place? And what do you love about either what the church used to be or what it still is, and that kind of thing. And so there was a couple of things that really stood out. One was just a sense of community, and that's something that we felt right from the start when we came in, was just this sense of community. And that's why my wife felt, you know, within a day, she was like, I'm home, this is where we're supposed to be. I was like, you're crazy. But she felt that right away. And so we want to make sure we do everything we can to protect that and to perpetuate that forward as we continue forward. And so in that sense, like, it's not something brand new, earth-shattering that we're trying to do, but it's like, hey, yeah, we want to be a welcoming church that cares about our people, you know, wherever they are and whatever's going on with them. Another thing that the group that was left really stressed to me was like, man, we loved it when we were able to do things in the community. You know, like they talked about the different things that they would do in the past, and since they had shrunk down, they didn't feel like they were able to do that stuff anymore. And so we had to start thinking a little bit outside the box. Like, okay, yeah, so when the church was 150 people, you did this on this scale. Obviously, with now 15 people, because we added my 3 to the 12. You know, with 15 people, we can't do that scale. but what can we do? And so we started looking at things that, we can do this, we can do that. We can set up our popcorn machine, we can set up our snow cone machine, we can give stuff away, whatever, and just let people know that Jesus loves them.
It's
we
awesome.
can do that.
If you look at what you can't do, you're going to shut down the conversation so fast, and you're going to do nothing.
And so we started to rethink and how can we engage our community? Because that's what everyone loved doing, was being a part of engaging the community. So what can we do to engage our community for where we are right now? Well, thankfully, since then, the Lord has grown us, and we have more that are in our group now, and so we can do more to engage the community, and so we're doing that. And so moving forward, that's a lot of what we'll continue to do. We do our big kids camp every summer. This year we're branching more into youth activities as well, and we've got a couple of youth road trips where they're going to water slides and amusement parks and stuff, and camping out. And
awesome.
It's just really exciting to see what all God's doing there. And of course, when we first got here, I think our only person under 20 was my son, who was 1.
So he can be in that demographic for a while. Hold that number for you.
So he was our whole children youth department.
There you go.
But now, so many kids and youth around. It's just really encouraging to see that. And had somebody was coming to check out the church, and they asked me, is your church like a real young, hip church? And I was like, no, that's Ryan. I said, no, we're really across the board, and we are. We have from babies to, old people, and they're old enough that they don't care to be called old people, So some people care.
They've stopped trying to shrug it off.
Yeah.
I'm at that point where I'm realizing I'm old.
And they probably don't watch videos on Facebook, so I'm probably safe saying that in the settings. So
you weren't necessarily talking about them, anyways.
Right. Yeah.
But as an encouragement, even today, so you're talking about your 2 pillars, or you want to be community focused and you want to be present in the community.
Yeah.
I just met a couple here as we were setting up, and we met Potter's House on the field.
Yeah.
Doing a community event. Yeah. And then they showed up here. And they're like, we were going to check out some places, but we felt so welcome and connected that first week that this is now home.
Right.
So, that's it. You're not going to, and it's one of those things where, I think it's one thing to be creative in ministry. I think there's far too much emphasis on the payout of that as far as the effectiveness for the kingdom. One of the things I love about Scripture is you see both the great moments and the failures is just kind of humanity, and we haven't shifted all that much. But in the same way that people draw and connect is still the same way we draw and connect. So there's ways that, we still have to speak in a way that people understand and that they feel welcome. But if you don't have that community, then and if it's more of a programs focus, and I have no problem with programs because they make things run, but if all we can do to get people in, and not just in, but retain them, is some form of shiny whatever. Yeah, it's going to fade, or the world's got it better.
Well, and too for me specifically, and all I mentioned those things, but those things aren't kind of the end goal. I really see the community and the church being a byproduct, and that being a byproduct of the gospel. And so I really feel that the gospel and the good news of Jesus and what he's done for us has to be central. And when our focus and our foundation is that, then on top of that, we have a beautiful church community built, right? And it's because we have that common ground, that common foundation, that we can then really experience true community together. And so I just would add that as something I see as very crucial in the whole conversation, which I think a lot of times in these kind of conversations, we can lose sight of that, just focusing on
you get these social gospels where it's just this.
Well, you want the byproduct, right? You want the tangible thing you see, but you don't necessarily always remember that, hey, that comes from Christ working in us.
And I think you need the gospel, not just to see those people grow, but to maintain those things, because the closer you get, the greater the chance for offense. Who's going to hurt you the most? Family.
Yeah.
And to be able to have that grace pour out of you, flow to you from others, that's got to be cross-centered, right?
Right. And it's the whole Great Commission too, right? It's of taking the gospel and making disciples of all nations and baptizing them and then teaching them. And so we want to see that happen. And that's a big reason that we do so much out in the community, is because that's where people are that need the gospel.
Just go meet people.
And so we want to meet them and build relationships and let them know that, hey, God loves you and we love you.
Yep.
And here's his truth for you. And so yeah, that's a lot of where we're
Yeah, I
coming
think
from.
a lot of what we need to do as the church, as far as the out part, is far more simple than I think. Definitely when I was growing up, in the church, I felt like the whole, the W word, witness, and all this stuff was so scary and freaky and all this, versus just, unashamedly just living your life for Christ in front of people and having that open invitation to community and exploring who he is. And then it's not on you. It's up to them walking out or staying in.
I think it's two-pronged too, where we have to live it out in front of people. But also at the same time, the gospel is a message. It is words that we have to speak and we have to share.
Yeah.
And I think that, it sounds like your upbringing might have been very similar to mine, where it was all about, maybe even knocking on doors just to tell people this
Stick
story
a track
or whatever.
under their windshield wiper, because then they'll come to faith. Or you'll get kicked out of the mall parking lot,
One way or the other. But, and so I think some, like in our generation, have kind of swung away from that and reacting to that, to the point of, well, they know I'm a Christian.
But I'm not going to say anything ever.
And so they see the way I live, so that's all I need to do. Well,
and
no.
how do you live anyways?
But
if you have the joy of the Lord in you, it's probably going to come out of this thing too.
Yeah, and so if you really have Jesus changing you on the inside, that's going to come out in what you say, just like you're saying. And so I think that's one thing that we have to be reminded of that, hey, the gospel is a message, and it's through that message that the Holy Spirit works in people's lives. And so we can't be scared to share that. Whether you're the pastor, church planter, or whatever we're called these days, or you're the businessman.
Yep, totally. Stay in the marketplace, serve the Lord there.
So
So through all of this, you've had a very different experience, and your congregation has a different experience than I think what most people kind of grow up either in the church or if they jump into an existing church. I think a lot of the time, I don't think most Christians spend a lot of time thinking about even their church. It's kind of like, I go to this thing, drop my kids off to this thing, sing some songs, maybe they volunteer. But understanding that the church, in the various expressions that it is, even just in West Kelowna, has different seasons, has different models. Have you had your eyes kind of open to anything coming from very established background? Like you serve one place, and you're on assistant, and then you're doing a campus, and then obviously being in the life of the church. But what can you kind of share with people as far as just seeing that there are seasons, and some might look like seasons of loss, but that God's just doing different things? And
and I would say to that, that I see church life very much like human life, in that, churches can be healthy and churches can be unhealthy. Typically, healthy churches grow and thrive. Unhealthy churches get sick and die, just like people, right? And so just like people, I think all churches need to have constant checkups, need to have ways where you're kind of checking yourself on, are we healthy? And that is not just measured by how many people were there.
No.
And this could be a whole long conversation on how you measure the health of a church, but I just say that to say that that's one thing that's really that I've stressed since I've been here is our goal as a church is to be healthy. We want to be a healthy church, and so the things that Scripture talks about as far as what a healthy church looks like, that's what we want to be and what we want to do. Is that always easy? No. Is that hard? Yes. Is exercise always easy? No. Do some of us need to do more of it? Well, yes. And so yeah, it's the same. And so you kind of have to keep a constant look at, are we healthy? Mm-hmm. Are we in a healthy place right now? If not, what is it that's bringing us down, kind of thing. And so yeah, you have to work through those things constantly on a regular basis as a church, because churches do have seasons, right? And so you have seasons of growth where it's fun and exciting, and I think that's where some of my friends that are really into church planning, they just really get the thrill out of that. Mm-hmm. When that beginning stage where things are just, everything's new, everything's thriving, and they look at like the old established church down the road with its, people that have been there for 60 years and don't want anything to change, and they say, oh, you guys are so whatever. Well, what do you want your church that you're starting to look like in 60 years? And to get there, you have to constantly have a barometer on that health gauge. And so whether you're the brand new church or the really old church, you've got to be looking at, are we healthy? Are we following what the Lord's called us to? And are we following him? Is Jesus center? Is Jesus center of what we're doing? Yeah. Or is whatever else, programs, buildings, whatever, facilities, stuff, whatever, has that become central? Mm-hmm. Because there's so many things that churches can easily start to focus on instead of focusing on Christ and the gospel.
Yeah, and it's one of those scary things where bums in the seat does not mean souls in heaven.
Right.
It doesn't mean a relationship with Jesus Christ. So, there are things that can dangerously look like growth because of a simple metric like attendance. Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, you want to see more people in community.
Yeah. And more people hearing the message.
But that's not necessarily a health metric.
Right.
It's a potential to then have health because you're in a relationship.
I think it is important
Yep.
that we look at that and we watch that, mm-hmm. Because they kind of did in the New Testament, right? Like they recorded like so many people were added.
3,000 got added in a day, which is totally our story. No,
exactly right. So the way that the Spirit works here for us. So, but no, So I just that's one thing that's really stood out to me, especially since coming here and being a part of this. It's just that importance of wherever you are. I was listening to one kind of speaking head on this kind of stuff, and he was saying that as early as a church plant is 3 years old, that it should start looking at what do we need to do to revitalize ourselves, because even 3 years in, you're starting to build some tendencies that might not be healthy. Mm-hmm. And so
it's very easy, I think, for churches to transition from trying to reach others and develop the church into maintenance and managing people's expectations. Mm-hmm. And if those people's expectations aren't on mission with the church and they're just kind of filling seats, mm-hmm. I think you easily end up, because I think old established churches can be driving and doing what God's called them to. But yes, there is the typical, the stereotype of they're just kind of in maintenance mode and surviving.
Yeah. Well, and it's easy too to go from reaching out, gathering people to, we gathered people, now we've got to take care of them, mm-hmm. which is legit, you do. You have mm-hmm. to figure that out. But at the same time, how do we take care of them? How do we disciple them into where they're now the ones reaching out? Because mm-hmm. that's our goal. Right?
Yeah.
Go and make disciples who make disciples. And so yeah.
That's a good church metric right there. How many of our people are making disciples?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, so I mean, that's, you guys, I know there's so much more to your story and this and that, and moving mm-hmm. here and there, and even how you got this facility and God's faithfulness.
Totally God
and that.
thing. So
yeah, it's one of those things. Just encourage everybody to continue to ask questions around town. Obviously, we advocate for putting your roots in deep wherever you're at, mm-hmm. but we really want people to know, just what's going on here.
Yeah,
for sure. And if you're somehow stumbled across this and you haven't quite figured out where you're at in faith, or you're not connected to a church, come check these guys out on Sunday at
10
10, the cliche time. It's awesome.
Pretty standard.
Yep.
But yeah, and I would say the same for you guys, Ryan. And it's pretty cool because one of the periods of our church was actually in the theater where you are. And so like our people would worship there for a while. And so it's pretty cool that you guys now are in that space and worshiping there. And
I met one of your guys like a year or so ago, and I'm like, yeah, we got on-site storage. He's like, you got what? I'm like, oh, there's some tension.
Yeah, they apparently had a trailer and
that's what we had feared,
everything and everything every week. And so by the time I got here, they had moved out of the theater and we weren't doing that anymore. We were still setting up somewhere else. So, but yeah, that's really cool that you guys are there. And yeah, I would encourage you, if you're checking out Faith, and check these guys out. And there are ways our churches are different, and all the churches in town, and I think God totally uses that. He brings kind of different expressions of the faith because people are different. And so some people, they're going to connect better with you, and like some people, they really care if a pastor still has hair or not, and so obviously they should come to your church.
Well, mine marched and then just stopped. Like it kind of got to a point, and then
mine, the ants keep marching on, my friend. They keep marching on. So, but no, yeah. So, but yeah, there's different things for sure, and so I would highly encourage anybody to go check out Vintage and what you guys got going on, and I just think it's really cool the way that God's led you guys here, and
it's been an adventure, that's for sure.
Yeah, and we're just, I can definitely tell that you guys are like us in the sense that we want to take the gospel to people, and we want to show them, hey, here's Jesus, and He's what you need.
Yeah.
And so if that's where you are, and you're like, hey, I'm checking out this Jesus thing, then yeah, check out one of our churches. We'd love to get to know you, and because it's that important, and we care about you. So
awesome. Thanks a ton, man. God bless.